And now joining us on Feathers and Field Goals here in UConn Week to give us a greater insight on the Huskies, we welcome in from the CT Scoreboard podcast, it's Jared Kotner joining us now. And Jared, hey, thank you so much for taking some time out of your night to record with us. This being one of the most, I think, highly anticipated matchups of Delaware's season, a good regional game in the FBS. Now that Delaware's, of course, jumped up to that level, it's one of those non-conference games that we know Delaware fans have been looking forward to. So thank you so much for helping us build up toward it.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to be with you guys and excited for this matchup as well. I know it's your first big FBS home game, so I'm sure you guys are going to have a great crowd out there making it tough on UConn, but I think it's going to be a fun game.
Now, somebody who knows a little bit about Delaware Stadium, and I guess maybe if you don't count the COVID season, Delaware Stadium crowds, it would be Joe Fagnano, UConn's starting quarterback. And in the offseason and then preseason leading up into this year, I was really curious to see, that's Joe Fagnano's name on UConn's roster still from the Nick Charlton days and the Maine connection. Of course, Fagnano, a Maine transfer. And I was thinking to myself, is he going to still be the starter and still eligible here in 25 to be that guy for the Huskies at Delaware? And sure enough, we now lead into the matchup with it being Fagnano versus the Delaware defense. That makes it really the first question on our minds, I think, from a Delaware perspective is, as you look at this, Jared, as you look at this game, UConn, Delaware, does the mutual familiarity between Delaware and UConn's Fagnano benefit one side more than the other, you think? I mean, it just seems like it could be a wash. Could it be a help more to one or the other?
No, I think it's going to be interesting. So not to go all self-promotion here, but as part of my podcast, I've got Joe on weekly to do a bit of a show with me. And we were talking a little bit about this and bringing up kind of previewing this game and what stands out to him about Delaware. And he's like, well, I've actually been there before. I've played Delaware. And he mentioned how these Delaware matchups were always tough. So I think he has an idea of what to expect a bit going into it. Obviously, the way things have changed going from FCS to FBS, I think should be a little bit interesting, given just some of the difference in the FCS to FBS athletes and kind of some of the depth there, which he brought up, because I did question him a little bit saying, hey, you've made the move from FCS to FBS, going from Maine to UConn. What were kind of some of the biggest challenges that hit you in making that transition? So maybe we have a little bit of an idea of what's going through some of these Delaware players' heads as they're making this jump from FCS to FBS. And he really did mention the depth as a key. So I think that's one thing, if you go to some of these FBS versus FCS matchups, you just look at the sidelines and you see sidelines that, are significantly fuller for the FBS teams. So having some of that depth, and then again, just the speed of the game a little bit, the physicality, the size. So I'm not sure if there's necessarily any advantage having gone up against him, but I think when you're a quarterback leading your team on the road, which is always tough to begin with, when you get to go to a place that you're a little bit more familiar with, you've been there before, you kind of have a little bit of an idea of what to expect. Probably a little bit of a benefit there, but I think, as you mentioned, they're familiar with him, he's familiar with them. So I don't know if it's quite a wash, but it's close to that.
Well, we'll definitely plug in that episode in our description for this. And, I got to listen to it but before we recorded tonight, and a lot of good insight on not just the income matchup ahead, but, the past results against Central Connecticut and Syracuse. And thinking about Joe, while the topic is up, describe the style quarterback he is for the Hens fans that maybe didn't catch him in 2020 and 2021 when he was with Maine against Delaware.
Yeah, I think what you're going to get with Joey, he's a really efficient quarterback. If you look at the stats from these past two games, against Central, he was 18 of 25 for 260. Syracuse, 26, I think it was, for 43 for 259. So you know what you're going to get week in and week out with Joe. And I think what makes this UConn offense really interesting for opponents to plan for is they've got a lot of playmakers that Joe doesn't need to do a whole lot of work. He could just get the ball out, whether it's a short pass to some of these wide receivers like Skylar Bell, who could then just, the next thing you know, turn up the field and it's a 75-yard touchdown. We've seen that this year with a couple of these guys on offense, whether it's some of the running backs he's got with Cam Edwards and Mel Brown, but with some of these receivers, Skylar Bell I mentioned, who was a transfer from Wisconsin, now in his second year at UConn, Shamar Porter, Romello Murphy. He's got guys that can make plays and really make explosive plays. So, I think this UConn offense doesn't necessarily ask a ton of Joe. and in talking with him, he tells me his favorite plays are when he could throw a 3-yard pass to one of these guys and watch them take off and see what they can do. So you'll see a guy who's really consistent and efficient out there. I don't think he has any turnovers to point this season. So that's something you're going to get with him. He knows what he's doing, and he's an experienced guy. He's been there. This is his 7th year of college eligibility, and something that he told me he didn't even know he had this year until the end of last year when someone brought up the idea to him that he might still have some time. So he's a guy who's been in these situations. He's calm and cool under pressure, is something Jim Mora, the head coach, mentioned about him today in his press conference talking about Joe. If you look back at the Syracuse game, UConn was up in that one, lost it late. They were down 3 with about a minute left, and he led them on a minute drive there to kick a field goal to tie that game and send it to overtime. So you're seeing a guy who's cool under pressure. And I think as you look for him again, it's just going to be getting this ball out to his playmakers and really seeing what they can do.
I'm glad that you brought that up, Jared, because when you look at teams that seem like they should be pretty evenly matched, we know UConn is a favorite on the road, and the spread, I think, hitting double digits by a touch. So I guess evenly matched. It depends on the eye of the beholder, right? We'll have to see how it all unfolds. But you sometimes do a side by side of these teams, and the head coach, the head coach's level of experience, at least at this level, the QB's level of experience on both sides. And UConn has the more veteran quarterback and more veteran head coach when you really stack it side by side. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It seems like the veteran nature of this team. It leads me into my question for you overall and the team style on defense as well. How has that side of the ball come together too, as we've seen UConn, at least from looking at it from afar, turn the corner more, especially last year?
Yeah. So last year they brought in a new defensive coordinator, Matt Brock, who was at Mississippi State. So anytime you get a chance to get an SEC guy coming your way, usually works out pretty nicely. And he's done a great job with this defense. He brings a 3-3-5 style of defense, which is something very different. You don't necessarily see that all the time. And last year, I think UConn fans were impressed with what he was able to do. And I think this also freed up Jim Mora, because not only was he serving as the head coach before Matt Brock came, but he was serving as the defensive coordinator as well. So a lot on his plate leading up to that. So he comes in on defense. Last year, they had a lot of returners back on defense. So that's been the one kind of question mark on this UConn team this year, was how exactly would this defense gel, bringing so many new pieces together. They didn't show a ton against Central Connecticut, which I think left people questioning just a little bit. I think they had 1 sack in that game, and you're kind of talking FBS, FCS. You thought, the D-line and these guys would kind of have a little bit of a field day with a little bit more of an undersized line there, and they didn't quite show it. I think part of that might have now been by design a little bit, and not showing everything against Central, because when they came out against Syracuse, it looked like a much different defense who held Syracuse to 6 points throughout, 3.5 quarters of that game, and really did a good job. So you're looking at some of these guys like Omar Diamande. He's a linebacker. The game against Syracuse had 8 tackles and a sack. Damon Brinson had 6 tackles and an interception last week. Cam Chadwick, defensive back there, another guy who had a good game. So you're looking at this defense that's still trying to, I think, put all of the pieces together, get comfortable with this scheme, especially when you start bringing a lot of new pieces into this 3-3-5 defense. It's again a little bit different. So I think that they're getting situated a little bit more. In the jump they made from that Central game to Syracuse was massive in my eyes, at least. You could see a defense that you're like, wow, they stuffed Syracuse on 4th and 1, 4th and 2 a couple times, which they had kind of given up some more explosive runs against Central. So you were worried a little bit. But they started to show what I think their potential looks like. So we'll see what they can do against Delaware. But it seems like they're starting to put the pieces together. And just as they get more of that game time, they'll get that experience and hopefully start to click like they did last year. Because last year, UConn, I think, had like a top 30 defense in certain categories when you look at, getting off the field on third downs there. So excited to see what they'll be able to do as the season goes on.
Jared, when you said 3-3-5, my eyebrows rose, because that is what Delaware defensive coordinator Manny Rojas runs for the program as well. And like you said, it's unique defensive coverage. At the FCS level, a lot of those FCS offenses couldn't pick up, that 3-high safety look, especially, sometimes with how the linebackers sit in coverage. It can be very it can be very confusing on, where's the blitz coming from, who's rushing the quarterback in what direction. So maybe it will help both offenses a little bit, and it's going to be different, calls, of course, but that at least like from the pre-snap structure, it might look a little bit similar to what they saw in fall camp. You mentioned Jim Mora a couple times. Let's talk about him, especially I'm sure a lot of listeners know who Jim Mora is, and as a Falcons fan, I'm familiar with him in the past. Really strong at UCLA, at least in the first half of his tenure at UCLA, but in year 4 now with the Huskies, and 2024 was where he really his vision for the program really was shown to light. Going 8-4, 9-4 with a win in the Fenway Bowl against North Carolina. And talk about what he has done for the program in his first few years and how he's really built it up.
Yeah, I think with what you've seen, what Jim Mora has done is he's come in there and really had to completely change the culture and direction of this program. I mean, I'm sure you guys know just from looking at afar, you kind of been a punching bag in the doormat for a lot of FBS teams when they played him, even some FCS teams losing to Holy Cross under Randy Edsall in his last year before Jim Mora came. But you look at what Jim Mora has done, and it's really is nothing short of remarkable. His first year there takes him to a bowl game 6-6, beats a top 25 Liberty team. Everyone gets really excited, starts to see what he's got. Year 2, a little bit of a step back, going 3-9. They lost some 50-50 games the year before that they had won. So things just kind of evened out a little bit. But last year, you really saw the vision for what Jim Mora's wanted to do with this team. The independent schedule has given them a nice mix of challenges where they get to go up against some Power 4 teams, but also having a nice mix of FBS teams that are at their level or maybe a little bit lower compared to where they are when you look at some of these rankings. So they put together a really nice year last year. Things really started to click both offensively and defensively. And I think one thing that was big about year 3 is UConn and the program really started to make more of an investment in NIL. So you started to see Jim Mora, who maybe in the earlier days here at UConn wasn't quite sure how to necessarily take advantage of the transfer portal given some of the NIL limitations they might have had on the football side of things. But they've really stepped up the amount of investment in NIL for football. So you're starting to see that, I think, these past couple of years here where that investment is paying off. But to go through last year, they played 3 ACC teams really close. Lost, I think, by 5 to Duke on the road. Lost by a touchdown to Syracuse and lost by 3 to Wake at home. If you go back and look at that game, a call that Jim Mora was not happy about at the end of the game. But they couldn't quite get over the hump against those ACC teams, but then pulled one off against North Carolina in the Fenway Bowl, kind of showing that UConn football really is here to stay a little bit and kind of show their fight a little bit, because this was a program, and I know Delaware is going through this jump from FCS to FBS. UConn wasn't doing that all too long ago. When you look at it in the early 2000s and what Randy Edsall was able to build, getting them to a Fiesta Bowl, then unfortunately just really had a decline over the past 10 years or so. But Jim Mora is getting them back on that path. The first winning season last year was the first winning season since 2010. So you go back quite a bit. Over a decade there to see that. So it was really exciting to see what Jim Mora has been able to do this program. He's just the kind of the consummate professional out there. He comes from a football family. His dad, got the famous playoffs rant. Jim also brings that same enthusiasm to the program. I've talked with him a bunch for the podcast as well. And he's a down to earth guy. Eats, sleeps, breathes football. One thing that's kind of interesting, he's brought on some former players now who are working on the coaching staff, and they're actually living in his house with him and his wife right now. So you talk about a guy that's dedicated to the football program. Not sure what my wife would say if I said, "Hey, let's move in 3 former players to that are going to join the coaching staff to live with us in the time being." But he's a guy who's truly just kind of committed himself later on in his career here. I think he saw UConn as a chance to really show his football chops and show what he could do, because the way things ended at UCLA probably weren't the way he wanted to see them end. So it's kind of been a rebuilding process for him and taking his career to really show what he can do. And I know UConn fans are thrilled with the job he's done.
Yeah, more as you mentioned, big football background history, and from the Delaware aspect of things, week 1 got to face Deshaun Jackson for his head coaching career from his great NFL career as a wide receiver for both Philadelphia and Washington, and then week 2 getting to face Deion Sanders, Coach Prime out there, and now week 3 facing Jim Mora. So in that aspect, it's been very interesting to see the Blue Hens face very prestigious names in the game in both college and the NFL. So Jared, thanks so much for your time, sitting down with us, looking into the Huskies and the Blue Hens heading into week 3, a big rivalry match, like you said, haven't been able to face since 1998. So I know both fan bases are excited to hopefully renew this rivalry, face off in 2025 before in a couple of years heading back up to Connecticut, facing off again. Just want to give you a chance to plug, where our listeners can find you and your work.
Yeah, thanks. So it's the Connecticut Scoreboard podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. On YouTube, we've got so a bunch of great content out there around UConn football, UConn basketball, some other Connecticut sports teams here. We got a bunch of other colleges and universities here in the state covering that. If you're on social, at CTScoreboardPod, wherever you're looking at socials, Twitter, Instagram, we've got you covered. So I appreciate the chance getting to come on, talk a little UConn football. Always fun to do that, and excited for this matchup on Saturday.
Yeah, we'll definitely look for Jared's work. He does great stuff. Go listen to his interviews with both Jim Mora and the quarterback before they kick things off. So Jared, thanks again for your time with us this evening.
You got it. Thanks so much.